The truck engine was
Oh
running.
my
Marcus could hear
God.
it from inside the house, that low rumble that meant someone was waiting for him. He was still in his old clothes, yesterday's clothes, actually, and he was holding Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed rabbit he'd kept since he was 4 years old. It was 7 in the morning on his 12th birthday. His mother was supposed to make pancakes. That was the deal every year. But there were no pancakes. There was no mother at the kitchen table. There was just an empty house that smelled like cigarettes and something else, something bad that nobody talked about. Marcus walked to the window and looked outside. His stepfather was standing next to the truck with his arms crossed. The look on his face was not angry. It was something worse than angry. It was the look of someone who had already decided something and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Marcus knew that look. He had seen it before when his mother promised to stop and then didn't. He had seen it when the bills started piling up and nobody paid them. He had seen it every single day for the last year, getting stronger, getting darker. Until now it had become this, an idle truck and a decision that had already been made. He did not say goodbye to his mother, because she did not say goodbye to him. When Marcus got in the truck, his stepfather did not explain anything. He just drove. The radio was playing something loud, and the man's hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles turned white. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, holding a rabbit, and watching the familiar streets turn into unfamiliar highways. They passed the grocery store, where his mother took him to buy milk. They passed the park, where he used to play before things got bad. They passed the gas station, where his stepfather sometimes took him on Sunday mornings. Everything he knew was disappearing behind him, getting smaller and smaller until it was gone completely. 40 minutes later, the truck stopped in front of a gray building. It was made of brick, and it had a sign that said, County Child Services Facility. Marcus read the words 3 times because he was hoping he was reading them wrong. But he was not reading them wrong. The building was real. The sign was real. And the moment felt like the moment in a movie when the music stops and something bad is about to happen. His stepfather opened the door and told him to get out. A woman came to the truck. She was holding a clipboard, and she had tired eyes, and she was wearing the kind of smile that was not real. She introduced herself, but Marcus did not remember her name. She was talking to his stepfather, and then she was talking to Marcus, but it all sounded like white noise, like something far away that was happening to someone else. The only thing that was real was Mr. Whiskers in his hands, and the feeling that his stomach had dropped into a place where it would never come back up. When the truck drove away, Marcus watched it disappear down the road. He thought his stepfather might look back. He thought there might be a moment where something changed and he would come back and say this was a mistake. But the truck just got smaller and smaller until it turned a corner and was gone. The woman with the clipboard was still talking. She was saying something about paperwork and temporary placement and the state taking care of him now. But Marcus was somewhere else. Marcus was in a place where a 12-year-old boy understood that his family had decided he was not worth keeping. The inside of the facility was exactly what you would expect when you walked through a door that said Child Services. There were hallways that were too bright. There were office doors with nameplates on them. There was a smell like cleaning supplies trying to cover up something worse underneath. There were other kids in a room watching a television that nobody was really watching. The woman with the clipboard showed Marcus to his room. It had 2 beds, a small window, and a desk with nothing on it. A teenager named Devon was lying on one of the beds, and he did not look up when Marcus came in. That first night, Marcus did not sleep. He sat on his bed and held Mr. Whiskers and looked out the window at a parking lot. He could see the road from there, and he kept thinking that maybe his mother would come. Maybe she would realize they had made a terrible mistake. Maybe she would drive up and honk the horn and tell him to come home. But the parking lot stayed empty. The road stayed quiet. And by 3 o'clock in the morning, Marcus had learned something new about the world. He had learned that things could change forever in 40 minutes. He had learned that the people who were supposed to take care of you could just stop doing that without any warning. He had learned that sometimes nobody came to save you because nobody even knew you needed saving. The next morning, the woman with the clipboard took him to eat breakfast with the other kids in the facility. The food was not good. It was not bad exactly, but it was food that had been made for a lot of people at once, by people who did not care whether it tasted good or not. There were eggs that were dry, and toast that was too brown, and juice that was from concentrate. Marcus was so hungry that he ate it all anyway, and then he watched the other kids finish their plates and get up and leave. Then he saw something that made him stop moving. There was food left on the plates. Perfectly good food that the kids had not finished. The workers were just throwing it away. They were throwing away eggs and toast and uneaten fruit into a grey garbage can like it was trash. Marcus watched them do this for every breakfast, every lunch, and every dinner for 3 days straight. There was enough food being thrown away every day to feed him. There was enough being wasted to feed everyone in the building, but instead of saving it, they destroyed it. On the 4th day, Marcus took an apple from the trash when nobody was looking. It was not even brown. It was just slightly bruised on one side, and the rest of it was perfectly fine. He hid it in his room and ate it very slowly, feeling like he had done something both wrong and necessary at the same time. That was the moment when something shifted inside him. That was the moment when a 12-year-old boy who had just been abandoned realized something crucial. The world was not going to take care of him. His family would not come back. The system that was supposed to protect him was throwing away enough food to save him. So someone else would have to. And standing in that facility, holding a bruised apple, Marcus made a choice that would change the entire direction of his life. He would save himself. Everything after that moment was just about figuring out how. Marcus turned 18 on a Tuesday. There was no cake at the facility. There was no celebration. What there was, instead, was a plastic bag with his name on it, containing everything he owned in the world. The director called him into her office and gave him a list of shelters in the city. She gave him a pamphlet about social services. She gave him a card with her phone number on it and told him she hoped he would stay in touch. But they both knew he would not. Tuesday morning, Marcus left the building and walked toward the main road. He did not look back at the facility. He did not think about the other kids still inside. He was 18 years old and legally an adult now, which meant the system that had raised him was officially done with him. The director had tried, the facility had tried, but there were only so many beds and so many resources. There were always more kids coming in than there were spaces to put them. Marcus did not go to the city. He did not go to a shelter. Instead, he took a bus to a place he had never been, following a map he had stolen from the facility's office. It showed county land. It showed public property that nobody owned and nobody was taking care of. It showed 5 acres that had been abandoned so long ago that the county had basically forgotten about them. When he got off the bus, 3 miles from where he wanted to be, Marcus started walking. He walked for 4 hours, carrying a backpack that weighed almost as much as he did. Inside was everything he owned: 2 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, 1 pair of socks, a jacket, Mr. Whiskers because he still kept the rabbit, a notebook, and seeds. Hundreds of seeds. Seeds he had stolen from the facility garden over the last 2 years of his life. The property was worse than he expected. There was a house, but it was not really a house anymore. The roof had collapsed on the left side. The windows were broken. The door hung open like the building was too tired to stay closed. There was a barn that was mostly just a frame now, the wood too rotten to support anything. The fields were wild with weeds. Everything was broken. Everything was dying or already dead. Most people would have looked at this land and seen nothing but a problem. Marcus looked at it and saw the only place in the world that would let him stay. He did not build the cabin first. He built the greenhouse. Most people would have done it backwards, trying to create shelter before creating food. But Marcus had learned something in the facility kitchen that nobody else seemed to understand. Food was the real problem. Food was what kept you alive. A person could live in almost anything if they had food. A person could survive almost anything if they did not have to depend on someone else for survival. So for the first 6 weeks, Marcus collected materials. He salvaged glass windows from the collapsed house. He took wood from the barn that was still solid enough to use. He hiked to dumps 3 counties over and carried back plastic sheeting, piece by piece, day after day, until his shoulders screamed and his hands bled into his gloves. The frame went up on week 7. The glass panels followed. By week 10, Marcus had created a structure that should not have been possible. A greenhouse built by an 18-year-old boy with no tools except the ones he had made himself, standing in the middle of dead land in a place where nobody was supposed to live. He put his first seeds in the ground in late October: tomato seeds, lettuce seeds, beans, things that needed warmth and light and the kind of care that Marcus understood completely because he had learned how to give it in the facility garden. He built a simple heating system using rocks and water and the sun's heat trapped inside the glass. It was not elegant. It was not designed by anyone with credentials. But it worked. That first winter was the kind of cold that breaks people. The temperature dropped to negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow came in November and did not leave until March. Marcus was living in a structure that was barely a shelter, a half-finished cabin made of salvaged wood that did not fit together properly. The wind came through cracks in the walls. The roof leaked. He had no electricity, no running water, no heat except for a small wood stove that he fed with branches he gathered from the surrounding forest. And he had almost no food except for what grew in the greenhouse. But he had enough. Not because he was strong, not because he was special, but because the greenhouse produced exactly what he needed to survive. 1 pound of tomatoes here, 2 pounds of lettuce there, beans that appeared slowly but steadily. It was not a lot. It was barely enough. But it was exactly the amount that a hungry 18-year-old boy needed to stay alive through a winter that should have killed him. There were moments when Marcus thought about giving up. There were nights in January when his fingers were so cold they would not move properly, and he wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. There were mornings in February when he was so hungry that he considered just walking to the main road and trying his luck in the city. But every time he thought about leaving, he walked into the greenhouse and looked at the plants. The plants did not care that he was cold. The plants did not care that he was lonely. The plants did not care that he was just a foster kid with no education and no prospects. The plants just grew. They just produced. They just kept showing up, day after day, doing their job without expecting anything except water and light. So Marcus kept showing up too. He kept working. He kept digging through the snow to reach the well he had found. He kept cutting wood. He kept tending the plants. He kept refusing to let the winter win. But the unexpected moment came in March. Marcus found something in the forest while he was gathering wood. It was a small cabin, completely hidden by trees, obviously very old and very abandoned. Inside, he found something that made him sit down in the snow and cry for the first time since his mother drove away from him 6 years before. The cabin was full of books, not new books, but old books, gardening books, books about farming, books about soil and plants and growing things in difficult climates. Someone, sometime in the past, had lived here and had left behind everything they knew. All their knowledge, all their methods, all their secrets about how to survive on land that nobody wanted. Marcus spent 3 days reading those books without stopping. He barely slept. He barely ate. He just read and read and read until his eyes hurt and his brain felt too full. What he learned in those 3 days changed everything. What he learned was that he was not alone. What he learned was that someone had done this before. Someone had tried to build a life from nothing in this same place. And that person had written it all down. That person had documented it. That person had left their knowledge behind for whoever found it. Marcus brought every single book back to his cabin. He organized them. He studied them. He began applying what he learned to his greenhouse, to his garden, to his survival. And for the first time since age 12, Marcus understood something that the foster system had never taught him. Knowledge was the only inheritance that nobody could take away from you. Knowledge was the only thing that stayed with you. Knowledge was the only thing that could actually save your life. By April, when the snow finally melted, Marcus was no longer just surviving. He was learning. He was building. He was becoming someone completely different than the scared boy who had walked away from a grey facility 6 months before. He was becoming unstoppable. By year 5, Marcus looked 10 years older than he actually was. The sun had burned his face dark brown. His hands were covered in scars from cuts and burns and the constant work of building. His shoulders had become wide and strong from years of physical labor. His hair was long now because he had stopped caring about how he looked. There was nobody to look good for. There was only the greenhouse, the expanding gardens, the cabin that was slowly becoming weatherproof, and the endless cycle of growing and harvesting and planning for the next season. He was 23 years old, and he had learned more about plants than most farmers learn in a lifetime. He knew soil, not from reading books, but from understanding it with his hands and his eyes and his entire body. He knew which plants would survive in which conditions. He knew how to save seeds from the strongest plants and replant them the next year. He knew how to build a greenhouse that could maintain temperature in ways that seemed like magic, but was actually just physics. He knew that if you paid attention to the world closely enough, it would teach you everything you needed to know. The greenhouse had expanded to 3,000 square feet. He had built it piece by piece, adding sections, improving the design, fixing mistakes as he discovered them. The temperature control system was now sophisticated. He had learned to use water barrels to store heat from the day and release it at night. He had created shade cloth systems that could be raised and lowered depending on the season. He had engineered air vents that opened and closed based on the temperature inside. Most of these innovations had come from trial and error, from failure and learning and trying again. None of them had come from a degree or a professional engineer. They had come from a person who was determined not to die. The gardens around the greenhouse had transformed the dead land into something that looked almost intentional. Rows of vegetables stretched across the cleared fields. A small chicken area was starting to take shape. A root cellar had been dug into the ground, a structure that maintained perfect temperature for winter storage. Everything was organized. Everything had a purpose. The 5 acres of dead ground had become a working farm, all built by one person, all maintained by one person, all a physical representation of refusal. Marcus did not expect visitors. He did not want visitors. When he heard the sound of footsteps crashing through the forest on a Tuesday afternoon in June, his first instinct was to hide. He was used to being alone. He was comfortable with being invisible. The idea of another human being seeing what he had built felt dangerous somehow. Like if someone else saw it, they might try to take it, or change it, or judge it. He watched from inside the greenhouse as a woman emerged from the trees. She was older, probably in her 50s, wearing expensive hiking clothes and carrying a backpack that looked like it had cost more money than Marcus had ever held. She stopped when she saw the greenhouse. She just stopped and stared at it. She looked at the structure, at the plants visible through the glass, at the organization of the gardens, at the cabin in the distance. And then she looked confused, like she had stumbled into a place that should not exist. Marcus watched her for a moment, and then he did something he had not done in 5 years. He opened the greenhouse door and spoke to another human being. "You are lost," he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rough, unused. The woman jumped. She turned to look at him and her eyes got very wide. "I took a wrong turn on the hiking trail," she said. "I did not expect to find... What is this place?" Marcus wanted to say nothing. Marcus wanted to tell her to leave, but instead, he heard himself answering her questions. He showed her the greenhouse. He explained the heating system. He told her about the water management and the seed selection and the way he had structured the gardens to maximize production across all seasons. The woman listened with an attention that felt dangerous. She asked questions. Real questions. Questions that meant she was actually trying to understand, not just making conversation. By the time she left, the sun was starting to set. She had been there for 4 hours. She told him her name was Patricia. She told him she was a journalist. She told him she had never seen anything like what he had built. She promised to tell people about it. Marcus did not believe her. In his experience, promises from people in the outside world rarely meant anything. But he did not tell her that. He just watched her disappear back into the forest, and he tried to forget the whole encounter had ever happened. 3 weeks later, a truck appeared on the main road. Then another. Then a man with a camera showed up at the greenhouse, asking if Marcus would let him photograph the structure. Then a newspaper published an article. Then more people came. Then a magazine sent someone. Then someone from a university called the local ranger station asking questions about a teenager living on county land. The attention was not welcome, but it was also unstoppable. By October of that year, the clearing where Marcus lived had become a destination. 10 people were visiting every week, 20 people, 50 people. They came with cameras and questions and the kind of awe that made Marcus uncomfortable. They looked at his greenhouse like it was impossible. They looked at his hands like he was some kind of genius. They looked at him like he was not a foster kid who had been thrown away. They looked at him like he was someone who had accomplished something remarkable. The unexpected moment came on a cold morning in November when Marcus found something that made him stop moving completely. A young girl, maybe 14 years old, was standing in the greenhouse crying. She was just standing there in front of a row of tomato plants, crying silently. Marcus did not know what to do. He had not been trained for this. He did not understand why his greenhouse, his survival, his refusal to fail, would make someone else feel something so strong that they had to cry. He asked her why she was crying. "Because my parents told me I am not good enough," she said. "They told me I should give up on trying. They told me I was born wrong and I would never be able to do anything. But you built this, you built all of this, and nobody gave you permission. Nobody told you that you were allowed." Marcus understood then. He understood that his greenhouse was not just about tomatoes. His greenhouse was not just about survival. His greenhouse was about something bigger. It was about showing people, especially people like him, that you did not have to wait for permission. You did not have to wait for the right family or the right circumstances or the right opportunities. You could just start. You could just build. You could just refuse to be the person that other people had decided you were supposed to be. By the end of that month, Marcus had made a decision that changed everything. He was going to stop hiding. He was going to start teaching. He was going to take everything he had learned from 5 years of solitude and he was going to share it. Not because he wanted attention, but because he understood now that attention was not the point. The point was whether you used it to help other people understand what they were capable of. The girl came back the next day with a shovel. She asked if she could help. Marcus said yes. And that was the moment when his life stopped being about survival and started being about transformation. By age 27, Marcus was no longer alone. There were 12 people living on his property. Some stayed for months, some stayed for years. All of them had the same story in different versions. They were young people who had aged out of foster systems. They were people who had been told they would not amount to anything. They were people who had seen the documentary about Marcus and decided they wanted to believe in something again. They came to the greenhouse to learn, but what they really came for was proof. Proof that a person could survive abandonment. Proof that the system did not get to decide what you became. Proof that you could build something real with your own hands. The documentary had been released 2 years earlier. A filmmaker named David had shown up at the property with cameras and a question. "Can I tell your story?" Marcus had said no at first. He was uncomfortable with attention. He was uncomfortable with the idea of his private life becoming public. But David had been patient. He had spent 3 months just filming, not pushing, not asking for anything except to be allowed to watch Marcus work. By the end of those 3 months, Marcus had realized something. The story was not really about him. The story was about what happened when someone refused to give up. The story was about the power of the earth, and the power of knowledge, and the power of deciding that your circumstances did not define you. When the documentary released on a streaming platform, it went viral in a way that nobody expected. Within 3 months, it had been watched by 3 million people. The comments section was filled with people telling their own stories. People in poverty, people in foster systems, people who had been abandoned, people who had been told they were not worth anything. All of them watching Marcus tend his plants and understanding for the first time that they did not have to accept the story that had been written about them. The first request came from a university. They wanted to research his greenhouse design. They wanted to understand his methods. They wanted to publish papers about what he had created. Marcus agreed, but with one condition. The research had to include information about how young people could replicate the system. He did not want academic papers that only scientists could read. He wanted knowledge that anyone could use. The university agreed. The second unexpected moment came 3 weeks later. A foundation called the Future Builders Initiative reached out. They had seen the documentary. They had read the university research. And they wanted to do something radical. They wanted to fund the creation of multiple greenhouses in multiple communities, using Marcus's exact design. They wanted to create what they called the Greenhouse Collective. They wanted Marcus to be the lead consultant. They offered him a salary, a large salary. A salary larger than any money Marcus had ever imagined. When he read the number, he thought it was a mistake. But it was not a mistake. They were serious. They wanted him so badly that they were willing to pay him an amount that would make him financially secure for the rest of his life. Marcus said no. The foundation did not understand. Everyone told him he was crazy. The volunteers on his property told him he should take it. David, the filmmaker, told him he should take it. The university researchers told him he should take it. But Marcus understood something that everyone else was missing. If he took the money, he would have to become something else. He would have to become an employee. He would have to move to an office. He would have to answer to a board of directors. He would have to explain himself to people who saw farming as a business model instead of a life choice. So he made them a different offer. Marcus told the foundation that he would work with them, but only on his terms. He would stay on his property. He would continue living the way he was living. He would train other people to build greenhouses. He would help communities create their own food systems. But he would do it as a partner, not an employee. He would do it as someone who owned his own work and his own life. The foundation said yes. What happened next was the unexpected moment that changed everything. Within 6 months, there were 5 greenhouse collectives in operation. A city in the Midwest, a rural area in the South, a neighborhood in California where most people lived in poverty and food was expensive and people went hungry. Each greenhouse was built using Marcus's design, but modified for local conditions. Each greenhouse was staffed by young people who had been through similar struggles as Marcus. Each greenhouse was producing food for communities that had no other reliable source. But the unexpected part was not the success. The unexpected part was what the greenhouses created beyond just food. They created community, they created jobs, they created hope. But most importantly, they created something that Marcus had not expected. They created a network of people who understood each other. Young people who had been abandoned found other young people who had been abandoned. They worked together, they learned together. They understood each other in ways that people with stable families never could. The greenhouses became more than farms. They became healing spaces. On a Tuesday in March, Marcus received a visitor that he did not expect. A woman in her 60s arrived at his property. She was nervous. She kept wringing her hands. She asked if she could talk to him privately. Marcus took her to the cabin, the original cabin that he had built, and they sat down. The woman told him her name was Sarah. She told him she had been a social worker at the facility where he had lived. She had retired 5 years earlier, but she had never stopped thinking about the kids she had failed. She had seen the documentary. She had cried watching it. She had realized that the system she had worked for had broken something in Marcus that he had to spend 10 years rebuilding on his own. Sarah told Marcus that she was sorry. She told him that she had done her best within a broken system, but her best had not been enough. She told him that watching what he had created had changed how she understood her entire career. She told him that she had spent the last year volunteering with the Greenhouse Collective in her city, and that she now understood that sometimes the greatest gift you could give a young person was to believe they could survive. Marcus listened to her, and then, for the first time since he was 23 years old, he cried in front of another person. He cried because the woman who represented the system that had tried to fix him was now working to help others who needed fixing. He cried because healing was not about pointing blame. Healing was about deciding that the past did not have to determine the future. He cried because at 27 years old, he had created something so big that he could not have imagined it when he was building the first greenhouse alone in the winter. Sarah stayed for a week. She volunteered in the gardens. She learned from the young people. She contributed her own skills and experience. When she left, she hugged Marcus and told him that she finally understood what her job should have been all along. It was not to fix broken kids. It was to help young people understand that they were not broken. It was to help them see that survival was possible. It was to help them believe they could build something. Marcus watched her drive away, and he understood that the movement had become bigger than him. The movement now included the very systems that had failed him. The movement had transformed into something that healed everyone it touched. And that was when Marcus realized the true power of what he had built. It was not about survival anymore. It was about redemption. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in December, forwarded through the Greenhouse Collective office. The handwriting was shaky, the paper was old. The person who had written it had taken a long time to find the courage to send it. Marcus recognized the handwriting before he read the name at the bottom. He had not seen that handwriting in 35 years, but he recognized it immediately. It was from his mother. He read the letter in the original cabin, sitting on the same bed where he had cried when he was 12 years old. The letter was not long. It said, "I saw the documentary. That was you. I did not know you had grown up to be the man you are. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not expect you to respond. I just wanted to say that I know what I did, and I see what you have become, and I am sorry." Marcus sat with the letter for 3 hours. He did not cry. He did not feel angry. He felt something more complicated than either of those things. He felt the weight of a choice he had made when he was 18 years old. The choice to build instead of break. The choice to survive instead of collapse. The choice to let his mother's failure teach him about strength instead of teaching him about weakness. He burned the letter. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Holding onto the letter would have meant holding onto a part of his story that he had already finished writing. His mother had made her choices. He had made his. They did not get to intersect anymore. The past was the past. What mattered now was what he had built with the time he had left. By age 40, Marcus looked like a different species than the scared boy who had gotten into a truck at 12. His hair was gray at the temples. His face was weathered in a way that spoke of decades spent in sun and wind and honest work. His hands were scarred so deeply that the scars had become permanent features of his skin. He moved like someone who had spent his entire life understanding his body's relationship to the earth. He spoke quietly, but when he spoke, people listened. He had earned a kind of authority that had nothing to do with credentials or titles. It came from having survived something that should have killed him, and then choosing to help others survive too. The Greenhouse Collective now operated in 47 cities. 47. There were greenhouses in places that were supposed to be food deserts. There were greenhouses in cities where people had given up hope. There were greenhouses run by people who had been exactly like Marcus, abandoned, alone, told they were worthless. And in each greenhouse, a young person was learning what Marcus had learned, that survival was possible, that knowledge was power, and that the system did not get to write the final chapter of your story. But the unexpected moment came on a day in November when Marcus received a visitor he had not anticipated. A teenager showed up at the property with her grandmother. The girl was maybe 16 years old. She was nervous. She did not make eye contact. She was carrying a piece of paper, and she was holding it like it was the most important thing in the world. The girl told Marcus that she had been watching videos of his greenhouse for 2 years. She told him that she had been in the foster system. She told him that she had tried to give up multiple times. She told him that watching him work had saved her life. Not metaphorically, literally. She had been planning to hurt herself, and then she had watched a video of Marcus teaching a group of young people how to save seeds, and something had clicked inside her. She had decided to survive. She handed him the piece of paper. It was a drawing. A detailed, beautiful drawing of the greenhouse. The girl had drawn it from memory, and it was accurate in every way. Every window. Every plant. Every detail of the structure that Marcus had spent so many years perfecting. "I want to build this," the girl said. "Not exactly like yours, but my own version. I want to grow things. I want to learn. I want to understand that I am capable of something. Will you teach me?" Marcus looked at the drawing. He looked at the girl. He looked at her grandmother, who was crying silently. And he understood something that he had never fully understood before. He understood that his survival was not just his own. His survival had become proof for thousands of other people that they could survive too. Every greenhouse that was built was another person learning that they were not disposable. Every young person who learned how to grow food was another person learning that they could create instead of destroy. By December, the girl was working in the greenhouse every day. She was learning the soil. She was learning the plants. She was learning what it meant to create something real with your own hands. She was learning what Marcus had learned when he was 18, that the only person who could save you was yourself. The unexpected moment came on the winter solstice when the girl grew her first tomato inside the greenhouse. It was small, it was not perfect, but it was hers. She had created it from nothing. And when she held that tomato in her hand and cried, Marcus understood the full circle of his own story. When he was 12, his mother had thrown him away. When he was 18, he had chosen himself. When he was 23, he had learned that teaching others was the purpose of survival. When he was 27, he had realized that redemption was possible for everyone, even the systems that had broken him. And now, at 40 years old, he was watching other people choose themselves. He was watching them build. He was watching them transform from people who believed they were broken into people who understood they were powerful. On the last day of the year, Marcus walked through his original greenhouse. The plants were thriving. The systems he had built were working perfectly. The temperature was exactly right. The humidity was exactly right. Everything was producing food, just like it had been producing food for 22 years. And standing in that greenhouse, surrounded by living things that depended on him, Marcus made a final decision. He would mentor more young people. He would expand the collective. He would train others to do what he did. He would make sure that the next generation did not have to be alone like he had been. He would prove that a system could be created that did not depend on family, on money, on luck, or on privilege. A system that depended only on willingness to work, on refusal to give up, and on understanding that you were worth saving. That night, Marcus slept in the original cabin, the one he had built alone when he was 18, the one that was still weatherproof and still functional, and still represented the moment when he had decided to become unstoppable. And in his dreams, he saw thousands of greenhouses stretching across the country, stretching across the world, all of them growing food, all of them growing hope, all of them growing proof that abandonment did not have to be the end of the story. It could be the beginning. The letter from his mother had asked for forgiveness. Marcus had burned it without responding. But standing in the greenhouse at 40 years old, surrounded by the evidence of what he had built, Marcus gave her forgiveness anyway. Not for her sake, but for his own. He forgave her because holding on to anger was a way of staying connected to the person she had been, and he had already spent enough time with that version of his story. He had spent the last 22 years writing a completely different ending. And in that ending, the abandoned boy became the man who showed others how to build. The lonely greenhouse became a movement that fed thousands. The dead land became the birthplace of hope. And survival stopped being about just staying alive. Survival became about showing other people that they could survive too. That was the moment Marcus understood what his life had always been about. It was not about the tomatoes. It was not about the greenhouse. It was not about the collective or the documentary or the foundation or any of the external validation. It was about proving every single day that a human being could choose themselves, that a human being could build something real, that a human being could refuse to disappear. And that proof, that living, breathing, growing proof, was a gift he could give to everyone who came after him. That was the meaning of survival.